Céline, it's so great to see you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I'm so excited to learn more about you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So it's so hard to know where to start with somebody like yourself, but I think a place I like to begin, most people may recognize your last name, being Oscar Peterson's daughter, but I want to really talk about the work that you do. So
All
what is
right.
that? What is it?
Well, my answer is always it depends on the day, which hat I'm wearing, but primarily my work is behind the scenes in music. Some days that is event production, some days that is event curation, most days that is artist representation and management. Sometimes it's the booking agent, sometimes it's social media and promotion. But ultimately, what I try to do, my goal in anything that I do is to be an artist advocate and to either do work that performing artists should not have to focus on, or do work to promote them and give them a place to perform and share their art, share their work. And that's really how we've known each other is through, kind of booking and curation and promotion.
And of course, you've become quite rich doing this, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm speaking to you from my Beverly Hills mansion at the moment.
So I have to say, I've worked with agents for 18 years, and was somebody who's not trained to work in the industry. I mean, I'm a classical pianist and I had a career, but I had no idea what I was getting into. And I have to say that my experience with 80% at least of the agents has been it's all about money. But you're so different. I mean, you're one of those rare exceptions when you talk about investing in artists. Can you tell me a little bit about your passion for doing that?
Well, I mean, a big part of it is the fact that artists shouldn't have to, but unfortunately largely do have to advocate for themselves. That's one of the most difficult things in the world. And for some people more than others, but especially if you're not within that, 1% of artists who don't really have to advocate because they're on a certain level. So for me, it's really all about pairing an artist or a show or a group with the right, first of all, venue or promoter or festival. And then when you found that right pairing, then the other things come together naturally. And of course, a large part of it, unfortunately, has to be financial. But a lot of the artists that I work with really are working very hard to break the mold of artists not being paid what they should. And a lot of the venues and festivals and promoters that I work with are on the same page. And so together we're able to really work to present, some of the best performances that audience will be able to remember, and make sure that the artists are compensated fairly, but also that it works for the presenter. But it's just so hard for the creators to be their own advocate. That's always hard. If the shoe were on the other foot, it would be very hard for me. If I were doing my own business, then it would be difficult. And I really love.
Why is that? And is it different in North America or Canada than it is in other places in the world?
Yes. Very different.
I was hoping you'd say that.
It is very different. I mean, it's Canada is certainly different, period. But Canada and the United States are worlds different than other places such as Japan or, certain countries within Europe. And it's very interesting to me to see how the music industry and the arts industry in general varies depending on that place. And I think self-advocacy is, of course, very difficult just because we have a hard time. If you have the confidence to advocate for yourself, you're very lucky, and that is wonderful. And that is something that is very hard to learn. You have to really be born with that kind of confidence. And then sometimes the wrong kind of people have that confidence, and that's when you get into an ego problem or anything like that.
Oh, I
But
had lots of those backstage.
oh, I'm sure.
I mean, I've played at the Glenn Gould studio many times for live broadcasts and played in Europe. And some of these young upper starters, you just want to go smack, smack, smack.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I mean, I'm very particular about who I work with, and that is a large part of it. I don't want to work with somebody that I don't enjoy. I can't advocate for you if I don't, number one, believe in what you're doing, and number two, respect how you're doing it. And if you don't have a respect for the music, and in some cases the legacy, or in the people you're working with, then we're not working together. I don't do the ego, it's just all very jive. I can't take it. And it really, it sends my blood pressure. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who fit into that category and have a certain amount of success. And that's very hard to watch, because then you see all these other people who are the opposite, and they are struggling. And we live in a time where social media numbers equal success, right? And that's a very difficult thing to navigate. But anyway, yes, it is different in other places, and I'm fascinated by that.
Let me just peel away at that. So, my experience is that when I lived in France, the operators from France Telecom would go to the museum on the weekend, right? Yes. I would have conversations in the black cabs in London about opera, right? Yes. Like, it doesn't seem to be quite like that here.
No, no, there's a different overall investment, whether it's a government investment in arts or an individual's investment in art and in knowledge and culture. It's just it's approached differently. I have never seen more dedicated jazz audiences, and so I would say, safe to say, music audiences, than in Japan. Never in my life. And it's such a beautiful and refreshing thing to see. And there are places in the smallest towns in France, I have some of my strongest memories of the most dedicated and vibrant audiences and fans. And it's so beautiful to see. Whereas then you come back to certain places in Canada or in the States, and it's all very nonchalant, and I'm sitting at my table at the club shushing people and really getting people to turn their cell phone volumes off. And it's not the same. Or people who believe they have a right to hear music for free, or they approach an artist and say, well, you should do this because it's a good opportunity. No, no, absolutely not. So yes, it's all different.
So it's a real values issue, don't you think?
Absolutely.
And maybe related to education as well, like people's experience. And
yes, I think that definitely plays a role, because I think it depends how much you're exposed and how much you really, I mean, if your only exposure to any kind of public event is a sporting event, then there is definitely a lack of knowledge or education that people have been exposed to in terms of what an arts event or a culture event is, and what the protocol is, and how it comes together. You're dealing with the big monster of the sports world versus the little dainty, ballerina of arts and culture. So I do think that a lack of education in some regard plays into it. Absolutely.
I always say, if a child picks up a violin now, they're more apt to support an orchestra later, right? Because I did that, right? I know where the concert hall is. There's so many people who've never been, and they're not even thinking about, like, oh, it's probably not my people, I'm not going to go there, this kind of thing. Right. Yeah, I think we have a serious cultural revolution we need right now.
I know, it really, well, one of the things that has always been so important to me even as a non-musician, is music education and arts education. And we are really like losing programs by the second and losing access by the second. And it's the opposite direction in which we need to go. It's really heartbreaking. It's devastating to watch this happen, and even, try as we may to make a change, it's really not, it's not changing the way we need it to, or as quickly as we need it to. And without, I mean, it's proven, there's proven data, without children having access to music and to art, their lives are not what they could be. Music is good for your health, music is good for your soul, it's good for your mental. And culture is so deeply important. It's not just all history, math, and sports. There needs to be more.
Or all just like, I'm going to have a career where I can make lots of money. I think this is really what I see as the cultural drive. Success equals, prestigious career with lots of money. And I'm not saying, that arts people shouldn't be compensated really extraordinarily well. I'm just saying that, most of us are in this particular, area because we really love it and we really want to invest in it and share it with other people, right? It's
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said, for artists that you and I both know, they couldn't possibly fathom the thought of doing anything else. This is what they are meant to do. Mm-hmm. And Robbie Botosh, that's what he is meant to do. Larnell Lewis, that is what he's doing, what he's supposed to be doing. Dad was, he would not have been able to do anything else. I really think that if any of the people I just mentioned, plus so many more, were forced into other careers, they wouldn't be who they are. They might not even survive, because they might not, within their mind and heart, be able to survive that. It's too much. And it needs to be a career. If being an influencer can be a career, then being an artist absolutely should be a career.
Let's not touch that one too much, okay?
Pardon me.
So tell me about your artists. Like, so let's put a context on it. What's it been like for them the last few years?
Oh, it's been awful. And it was, and the thing is, it was at times awful pre-COVID. Yeah. Right. And so, and I think that's something that is often forgotten is the fact that it's not that everything was going swimmingly and then all of a sudden a pandemic hit. It's that we're dealing with people who were, really not making money prior to that, and we're struggling to work because there are not enough spots for everybody and there's not enough money. And then you have a global pandemic and everybody loses everything for the better part of 2 years. Mm-hmm. And how do you climb back? How do you get your way back? And when you do come back, this, your industry looks drastically different than when you left it,
And can you tell me a little bit about that? What does it look like now?
Well, so aside from, of course, losing a lot of venues, there's the idea that artists in some places are being pitched to be paid even less. And what is less than something that was already unacceptable? It's just not, it's not manageable. And you deal with, when you're talking about a headlining artist, so to speak, so a band leader, and you're booking their trio, so you're booking them for their name, there's only so often, they can only work so often, right? So if that person whose name is on the marquee can only work once every 2 weeks because they need to sell out those shows, then that's how often they can work. So it's not acceptable to say, okay, here's your one gig for the next 2 weeks and you're going to make $175. Whereas if you're dealing with people who primarily make a living being in the band, it is a bit different because, a lot of sidemen, so to speak, I struggle with that word, but sidemen can work far more often. They can do 2 gigs a night. Mm-hmm. So if you can do 2 gigs a night, 7 days a week at $175, that's fantastic compared to the other option. So it really, when you compile all of that together with a lack of venues and a lack of funding for venues and festivals, and it's just a recipe for disaster. And it's very, very scary. And pre-COVID, I was known for taking people out of their comfort zones in terms of booking and what I would ask for my artists. And now it's even harder because people come right out at the top and say, well, we just can't do that because of COVID. And I say, well, then my artists just can't perform.
Wow.
You know.
Well, it's been a rough ride at our end too.
Yes, yes. And that's the thing. You have to find that sweet spot, and you have to be able to, people in my position have to be able to work with the people in your position. It can't be a cut and dry, it's one thing if someone in my position is to come in with something completely unreasonable, then if that gap is so big, then I would imagine it's hard for you to say anything but, okay, well, then we can't do it. Yeah. But you have to be able to work together, but it's also hard when, working with you and your team, there's always conversations. Mm-hmm. Nothing is ever cut and dry. And I know that I can approach you and we can have a conversation and see what will work. And it's not like that in a lot of places. It's it's an either or, and that's not workable for people, and I think
I don't really feel like a promoter, I never wear that name, right? Like I just feel like a musician who's loves music, is trying to get more music to happen. And I want to just say a big thank you to you for supplying us with so many great artists during the pandemic for our virtual series. That was just phenomenal, to be able to have some of those names, everywhere from like Chicago to New York to Los Angeles. It was really, really amazing. And our people here really appreciated it, our listeners and everybody on the team. So thank you for that. It was
my pleasure. And I have to say, you guys did your pivot exceptionally well. And no one that I brought to you felt like they were doing you a favor. This was a job that they were happy to do and happy to have. You successfully provided artists with work that they could feel good about. And that did not happen consistently from lots of places throughout COVID. And so the fact that the Phoenix Sessions was able to be successful for all parties and intriguing for all parties, that's no small feat. And I genuinely believe that a large part of the reason that you and your team are so good at what you do and that it's so enjoyable to work with you is because you're a musician, right? Like you said, it really, you have a different lens. You're not,
well, my husband's a jazz pianist, right? So we just love that genre as well, and classical, and the genres that don't get the attention are the ones that I'm most interested in presenting, to be honest. They don't necessarily pay the bills, so we have to do some of the other, but it's I guess I feel that my motivation for doing it is a little different than a lot of the industry, and I think that's why you can say what you did. But I've managed to convince my entire community that this is the way to go as well. And I think that is our whole team feels this way, right? And when an artist comes, it's like, when Robbie comes now, it's like family, right? You've been here before. Oh, well, now you're part of the Aeolian family, so that's another thing that I really love, like my first experience with Buffy St. Marie, being able to get to know her and then go to visit her and then have her marry Bryan and I. And it's just building those relationships are more important to me than anything else, right? And the inspiration and the opportunities as well, to have an artist come and do a little bit more. And we'll talk about that.
Yes.
I do run a free after-school music program, and I've got our men's chorus, and I would love to pair up some opportunities for the artists to work with those programs.
Oh, absolutely.
So COVID's been hard, and it's still going, right?
Yep. hasn't gone away.
And government supports have completely dropped off. This is going to be for us, I think, the most difficult time period. COVID was tricky, but we had some extra support, and now it's gone. And ticket sales are not what we'd hope. So and I know that across the industry.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
It's really like you're kind of going, oh no.
Well, it's so interesting to me. I've seen nothing but people chomping at the bit to come back and be in the audience for the last 2 years, and now it's able to happen. And I'm going, where is everybody?
Yeah.
Where'd you go? And I understand the apprehension. That's the other side of it, because I am also apprehensive. I'm not comfortable with the lack of care that there is in terms of COVID restrictions and all of that. And I absolutely understand we have to live life, but I also feel we need to protect human life and
everything possible. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so it's very hard. So I understand not, there are certain situations where I wouldn't necessarily be ready to be in specific audiences, but it is terrifying to think, oh, this would have been a slam dunk pre-COVID, and now it, we can't fill the room. It's very scary, very, very scary.
Yeah. I think the thing that I'm looking at is just trying to be more innovative and figure out ways to with the virtual now. We did this big Ukrainian fundraiser and raised $73,000. But a lot of the listeners were global for that, and they've shown interest. So I think, trying to come up with a hybrid opportunity. Hopefully the agents will work with us on that one. Some of them are like, no, we're not doing that. And I'm like, what? Yeah. So, but hopefully the industry will kind of see the light there we have an aging audience too, right? So a lot of our people get to the point where they don't want to go out after dark. And yes. So it's really an ideal thing. Anyway, back to you. So I want to just talk a little bit. I know we weren't, sorry.
That's okay.
I want to talk just a little bit about your life in relationship to growing up in the family that you did, if you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
So what was it like being Oscar Peterson's daughter? What is it still like,
Yes. Well, actually, no, that's really good recognition. So I will say, as a child, and this is the answer that I love to give because it bothers people. That for whatever reason brings me joy. It was normal for me. It was normal. It was, my childhood was normal in my mind. It wasn't until I arrived at school and had outside influences from, not even from kids, but from their parents and from certain teachers that made me feel, oh, I'm the odd one out here. I'm not normal. And there are ways in which I knew things weren't normal. As my dad was older than some of my friends' grandparents. That was not normal. That was a lot for me to reckon with throughout my childhood. But in terms of his career and his notoriety, I felt the most comfortable and the most normal out of school, on the road with dad and with the quartet and traveling. That was my normal, and that was my comfort place. I felt like an alien in school. And that was always very interesting. And it's interesting to look back on that as well as a, mostly formed adult and mostly functioning adults who has had a lot of reflection time. There are certainly things about my family legacy now that are different than they were when I was a kid. I am met with different, sometimes obstacles or sometimes blessings that, I have to really think about how I want to navigate each of those situations. And there are certainly things that are very hard to be without an ability to defend someone who is not here is sometimes hard, or is often hard, and to have a certain amount of absolutely no control over ways his image or music or name is used or taken advantage of is probably the hardest. But in terms of people making assumptions about, I mean, I'm used to that by now. So that's the easiest part of it, because you just learn to not care, and you learn to not think twice about it. And then there's all, you know, all the wonderful things are, of course, what I cling to, which is the people that I grew up with and the people that I still have around me, and the memories that I made, the education that I was lucky enough to have because of spending 16 years on the road. And that certainly informed the career that I would eventually step into, and gave me some of what I think are my best tools and assets in terms of being beneficial to the people I work with. So, you know, all that long drawn out answer to say it was wonderful. It is wonderful. It was hard. It is hard.
So my dad was the high school principal.
Oh,
My nothing like you, but I mean, it was a
in some
horror.
ways worse.
It was a horror.
That's in some ways worse. Oh man.
Even from the teacher's standpoint, right? Because some of them wanted my dad's job, and others, you know, it was either side of the fence on that one. They would, you know, look at me as special or as deplorable, you know, and then the kids teasing and all that kind of stuff. So just back to you though, like, do you mind talking a little bit about, like, what did you experience when it was school time? Like, what did the parents say? Like,
well, you know, so I went to the same school from kindergarten until grade 7.
okay.
And kindergarten that year was great. And then as I started getting into grade 1 and grade 2, and therefore I went to a very small private school in Mississauga. And but as you got older, you were exposed to more kids. Mm-hmm. And that would, you know, kids go home and say very innocent things, and then they say them to their parents, and their parents know exactly who they're talking about or what they're talking about, and then their own assumptions get, you know, brought into the conversation, and parents talk to teachers and to their friends, and that's when things can change. So my first school was definitely where I had some of the strongest connections. One of my closest friends today is someone I met when I was at that school. And actually one of the kids who's still a dear friend that I was in class with, starting from kindergarten until I left at the end of grade 7, is a wonderful saxophone player, a jazz saxophone player. His name is Matt Werschel. His debut album came out just before COVID. And he's a sweetheart. He's an exceptional musician, and he picked up his sax when we started band in 5th grade and didn't put it down. And he was the only person in the band that took it seriously. And I mean, he lived in New York, he went to the Manhattan School of Music, and now he's back in Toronto, and he's wonderful. And it's so nice to see that kind of story come out of.
I can see you lighting up when you talk about this. Like, this is obviously your huge passion is to help these musicians flourish. It's so it charges me up, you know, because where I get to feel that is when I work with the kids in our free after school music program, and I see them, you know, we had 2 get into the Faculty of Music here this year, like congratulations, an oboist and a violist, and I'm just like the proudest dad, you know.
Absolutely. Well, it's a love, right? And you're so devoted to it. And I think there's part of it, at least for me, there's part of it that fulfills that kind of thing. You know, when people shake their finger at me and say, well, why don't you play piano? Why don't you have a career? Da, 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 da. And I say, because it wasn't right for me. And that's not what I wanted. And it wasn't right for me. I absolutely wanted all the music education I could get my hands on. But look how right it was for somebody else. And that's what is so important. It's not forcing it on people. It's making sure that everybody has the access, and then they have the opportunity to find out that this is what they want to do. And
people actually had the expectation that you should have done the same thing as your dad.
oh, every day,
My
oh,
God.
I can't tell you. I
don't know
can't
how
tell
you
you.
live with that one.
Oh, it's from the time I was a kid until now. And it, you know, even I was just at Jazz Bistro before I left, and the woman next to me leaned in and said, "You really don't play piano?" And I just went, "No, I don't. Sorry to disappoint you." You know, it's ironic that I've seemed to have disappointed countless random strangers, but I not wanting to play piano in no way disappointed either of my parents. So, you know, oh well. Too bad. But it, you know, but school was, yeah, it was not, kids are innocent. Kids are innocent until their parents or teachers or other adults around them give them a reason not to be. And so when parents point out that I'm different, then the kids get to run with that. And that's what made it hard. I had a really solid group
By
of friends.
different, like what? My dad's a pianist, so I'm so different. Like, what was it?
Well, yeah, it started with just, you know, well, her dad's famous and rich and all of those, you know, lovely words that people use. And then you add into that the fact that I would go out of school for sometimes a few days, sometimes a week, or in the summer, I'd be gone for 4 or 5 weeks at a time for my dad's work. He tried at that point. I mean, he was 66 when I was born. So he was no longer on the road for 350 days a year that he would have been prior to that. So, but he was still on the road a lot, but he could call the shots. So he would try to have all the big tours happen in the summer or in the winter over break, and just do little things, you know, a week here or there so that I wouldn't have to be out of school as much. That said, didn't make a difference because in the eyes of everybody else, I was still out of school. So I'd be gone, and I would come back, and all of a sudden there's a week of talking about me that I've missed, and I'd have to work to find that balance again and remind people that I'm just a normal person. And, you know, and again, people's assumptions play into it. What they envision your life to be is often what triggers how they will treat you.
So I can't not touch this subject. So you're in a private school in Toronto, and your dad's famous, and you're getting it from that end. And I'm just trying to think back in history and wonder if I actually had any Black people in my classes. Were there any issues with that? Like,
oh yes. So I was one of, at the highest moment of diversity, I was one of 3 children of color, not just Black, children of color in the entire school. And I grew up in Mississauga, where there was a lot of, you know, people would come to Canada and then they would land in, you know, some of the suburban cities outside of Toronto, and Mississauga was one of them. And so my neighborhood did not reflect my school. And so there was, in the first few years, it was just me. And then there was another little brown kid that came in, and then there was another one after that. And that was kind of it. And that did not change until I went to high school. And then in high school, I went to 4 high schools, and then eventually dropped out, and I never graduated high school.
So just, can I go back though? Like, what was it like? I mean, you know, being an LGBTQ guy who didn't come out in high school because the only person I knew who was identifying that way killed themselves. I mean, I know a little bit what it can feel like to be different, but it was, you know, more, I acted differently from the crowd, and I got a lot of teasing from that, right? So, but do you have anything like that you could put your finger on that was made it challenging or good?
From a race standpoint, I can look back and see certain situations and go, oh, I now know that this is where this interaction with this teacher stemmed from. Kids, not so much. Definitely the thing that overshadowed everything was my last name. And that was where a majority of my bullying came from. I'm also a larger person. And so then eventually that came into play as well. And so you get teased for being the fat kid of the famous guy. And so there were a lot of different elements, but in terms of
So there was an
recognizing
admiration for
no. No, honestly, I will say there's one teacher from my middle school that made that experience of that 8 years more than tolerable. He was an advocate for me from my first day in his class, which wasn't until grade 5. And he was a constant advocate. And there were other teachers from when I was in the younger grades that were wonderful to me, and and I'm still in touch with some of them, which is lovely. But there is this one teacher in particular, Mr. Dalglish, was my advocate, and he was also my teacher through a period of great change. I mean, I lost my sister, I lost countless honorary uncles, I called them, who were people important to I mean, Ray Brown died when I was in his class. Norman Granz died, which was one of the most life-altering events, not just for me, obviously, but for Dad. It was the moment a lot of things changed for him. And so there was a lot of, and then my brother died a couple years after that. And I had nieces and nephews that were born. And I was in, 5th grade, and I'm a great aunt all of a sudden. And so, there were a lot of things that were happening that I couldn't fully understand, that were changing my life, but were also changing my dad's life. And this one teacher made a point to check on me consistently and make sure that I was okay, and make sure that I was treated the way I needed to be treated, and I was treated normally, but also given support. And he was that person for me. And I don't know I don't know how that experience would have been if he were not part of it. And I mean, he came to my dad's burial, and that meant the world to me, because it was just this, there were very few people there, maybe 20 people at best. And the fact that he was one of them was very meaningful, very, very meaningful to me. And after I stopped being at a school where he was, things changed again, because then you have to find new allies. And I did not find the same allies at my other schools.
So is that why you dropped out?
That's not really why I dropped out. I mean, high school was a lot harder for me. Things that were happening in my life were a lot harder. My dad was getting older. He was in and out of good health. And we were, of course, still traveling. And things were just changing. And so it was harder for me to find my place. I had a place in my middle school. I did. And it was harder for me to find my place in my high schools. One of them, my first high school, the principal ran away with all the money and bankrupted the school. So me leaving that school was not my choice. But then then from that school, I decided I've never been to public school. I want to go to public school. And I went to a public school for 1 semester. And it was that miserable. It was that hard. And I had a very rough altercation with a science teacher who we would go on vacation every year for 1 month in March. So we get 2 weeks for spring, March break, and then we would take an additional 2. That was my dad's vacation. We would go to Barbados and we would spend a month there. It was very good for him physically. The warm air was good for his arthritis. The environment we were in and the friends we made were good for him mentally and emotionally. It was just wonderful. And it was what he needed. And he didn't want to do it alone. So we all went. And so I would go to my teachers a couple weeks before we would leave. And I would say, this is how long I'm going to be gone. And this is for any trip, but especially for this one, this is how long I'm going to be gone. You know, please prepare as many assignments as you can so that I can do them and then not be as far behind when I get back. Everybody was cool with it, except this one teacher who just said, you know, I'm not going to do that. Your father needs to find some other time and place to write his music that doesn't interfere with your school.
Oh my God.
And I went, ugh. And I never, ever, if I ever had a problem at school, I always went to my mom because she would handle it differently than my dad would handle it. His fierce protection would mean, you know, it was just an eruption. So I always went to my mom. That time I didn't. That time I was so flabbergasted that I went to my dad and I said, this is what just happened. And he said, okay, I'll take care of it, in a very alarmingly calm tone. And I went, oh, okay. I went to bed, went to school the next day. I was going home with a friend, so I was not getting picked up. And I'm in grade 9 at this point, and I was not getting picked up. But at the end of the day, I see a black town car outside of my school. And I knew that town car at this public school only belonged to one person. So I was very bold and I went up to it and I knocked on the window, which was of course tinted, and it came down and I hear, hi, Cookie. And I went, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, I'm here to see your teacher. Is Mr. So-and-so around? And I lied and said, he has a spare at the end of the day. He goes an hour early than we do. And he said, oh, that's too bad. And that teacher, to this day, I'm sure, does not know what I saved him from. So he definitely, wherever he is, he owes me. But it's just the inconsideration. He went out of his way, this teacher went out of his way to make things difficult, and they didn't have to be. And that's what I say when I mean sometimes teachers are the problem. It's not kids.
Oh, a lot of the time, especially.
Yes.
Yeah, we need a revolution in education here. It's just, yeah, post-industrial revolution stuff. I can't take it. That is a great story. I have to say, I'll never forget that story. It's sometimes what I want to do, you know, with my kids in this free after school music program when they're going through stuff. I just want to be the dad and just clear away the stress for them, right? It's
yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's hard. It's a lot. And every kid, no matter their circumstances, needs an advocate.
Yeah. And
there's, I have a friend, one of the girls that I went to middle school with, she struggled and she was not normal, so to speak, right? She stood out from other kids. And, she was a bigger girl who was interested in sports and not interested in going to the mall and wearing dresses and doing makeup and all of those things. And she was interested in politics and business, and she was brilliant. And she did struggle with, her place in school, which oftentimes showed itself through bullying, which is unfortunate. She had some, she was the source of pain for some other kids. She was never a source of pain for me. She was always, I think there was a bit of the outcast thing that she must have, seen in me. We related in that way. I'm not sure, but she was always wonderful to me. And she took her own life while she was in high school. And she's one of 3 kids that I've gone to school with, 3 people that I've gone to school with who have committed suicide. And I had a conversation, one was not that long ago, and I had a conversation with my mom about it. And she said, I don't know one person from my entire time in middle school or high school or college who committed suicide. And the fact that not just one, but more than one, and all of them were people you were friends with, some closer than others, but friends with, is mind-boggling. And that in itself is one of the most glaring points of proof that there's a problem and it needs to be addressed. We're losing, Carly is the girl's name. She was brilliant. And we are worse off because she is not here doing what she was destined to do. She started a movement at our middle school against one of the teachers who was a big problem for a lot of kids. And I can't say the name of the movement because the teacher's name is in it, but she started this movement about why this teacher is not effective as an educator and why this teacher is going to be causing damage to kids instead of nurturing them and supporting them in ways they need to be supported. And she got expelled because she started that. No one listened to her. And again, small private school, they're not ready to hear something like that. And so she got expelled, and she wrote me, I was out. I had Norwalk virus, if that's even still a thing. And I was not in school for the 2.5 weeks that this was taking place. And my mom got the phone call that she'd been expelled. And less than a week later, I got a massive envelope in the mail with containing a 5-page handwritten letter for me about basically, don't let the bastards get you down. Do what you're going to do. Don't listen to people. Their opinion doesn't matter. Their influence doesn't matter. What they say does not matter. You do you. You are strong. You are smart. You are beautiful. You are brilliant. All of these amazing things. And then the other part of the letter was her whole essentially manifesto about this movement and why it's important to stop giving jobs to people who insist on teaching like this woman was teaching. And it was so powerful, and I keep it. I still have it. I just, it ended absolutely how it should not have ended. You know, she is a voice and a presence that we need in the world. And it's a real shame that we don't have her anymore.
Well, it's good that you can still springboard her voice out, though, without those memories. In Finland, the teachers all have to have master's degrees, and they get paid as much as a doctor, and it's really competitive. And but in the classes, they get a group of 5 students to go in to assess the teachers. And give the feedback to how their lesson planning was and all that stuff, right? Like,
oh my God.
There are places where it's done differently. That's all I'm saying. We just need to get there.
Absolutely. That's incredible. And yeah. I mean, we can't even get something as simple as all our teachers in our school at least have to reflect our students. You know, like we can't, if you're in a school and there are no teachers of color, we have a problem. If you're in a school and there are no teachers that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, then we have a problem. And that can be a tough conversation because you shouldn't have to self-identify to qualify for a job. However, for the benefit of students, it's these educational institutions' response, especially the private ones, both of them really, but to make sure that there is a teacher that can be an ally and a support system for every student in your school. That's just how it has to work. And it does not work like that. And it drives me nuts.
Like we're a long lost brother and sister, I'm sure of it.
I
know. So I know we could talk all day, but I want to just touch on a couple of things. So, moving forward, we're trying to get out of this pandemic, right? We're not going to have a choice about that. We'll see what the virus does. But what are your dreams and aspirations for your artists and for the industry as we move out of COVID? Do you think there's been any lessons learned, for example?
I do, actually. I do think that there have been some lessons learned, but the one that I want people to really learn or just to think about and have in the back of their mind is the value of artists. I think that rightfully there have been so many conversations and efforts about making sure that we save venues, and that has to be a priority, but the artists should be on the same tier.
Mhm.
And you know, there were some things that came across my desk during COVID where there were venues asking me to have people perform for free to save the venue. And I thought, we can't always turn to that, because the artist needs to put food on their table. The artist has to provide for their kids. There, you know, it goes both ways. It's not, you know, I'm all for figuring out what works for everybody, but it's not solely the artist's job to save the venues. And it's not solely the venue's job to save the artists, right? There's a lot of different moving parts. So coming out of, or transitioning to wherever we are within COVID now, I really want to make sure that artist value is heightened, because it's all, you know, there's equal importance here. You know, we need the promoters, we need the presenters, we need the festivals, we need the venues, and we need the artists. And so we all need to be able to figure out how everybody can benefit and survive, not even benefit, just survive, working together and going forward. I think that that's where I'm focused at the moment. That, and begging people to come out and support, because that's actually how it happens. You know, people, you know, we're all tired of virtual, but yet we're still seeing empty seats. So how do we do that? And that's what I'm trying to figure out, because that's what needs to come back. We need full rooms. Artists need to play to full rooms. Venues need full rooms to survive so that they can keep going. We need the warmth in that room, and we need people to celebrate the music. You know, one of the strangest things that I kept hearing repeatedly, or sorry, one of the things that artists kept telling me repeatedly was the strangest thing about COVID was playing to no one, playing to their phone or to their computer, knowing there's people on the other side, but you're not, you know, you're not going to stop. Let me just look at my comments here. That's not, you know, not how a lot of people were going to do that. So you know, we need full rooms, and that's how we can work to go forward. And people need to be willing to collaborate, and collaboration is in some cases greater, and in other cases much less, and it needs to be greater across the board.
That's really wonderful, kind of a vision. And, you know, I would like to say that I want to see everybody flourish. You know, I really want to go to that level, because as you said, it was tough before the pandemic, and, you know, there's something seriously broken that needs attention here. One of the things that we're doing right now, I don't know if I told you that we launched a songwriting contest for London, because, you know, we're now a UNESCO City of Music, and
Yes.
we had 162 entries.
Oh,
And
wow.
the songs had to be about London. So we have all this now, this whole repertoire of songs about London, which I think is fantastic, because, you know, it's building identity. But the prizes, besides some cash prizes, which we got a really wonderful corporation to do, we have, you know, we're going to record them. We're going to give them a concert opportunity. And we're also linking them up with industry people to help them advance their careers, right? And I just have this vision now that we have all this technology at the hall, that we could be doing so much more of this, you know? And figuring out ways to, like, get a little more concrete than just hiring the artist for a show, right? But to figure out, like, okay, we've got this and that now, you know, what could we do to sort of help bring their career up to another level? So that's, and I've applied for some grants for that. We'll see how it goes, but, you know, yes. I really would love to see that. And I think if more people thought that way in the industry, we will all benefit in the end, right? If the artist does better, then we all do better. And that's a piece that, yeah, we've got to have a shift here. And you know, to get the people back, you know, I don't know how it is, you know, in the arenas you've operated, but it's actually one by one by one by one, right? Yes. It's those relationships. It's not a sign. It's not free tickets. It's not like, it's it's building an actual relationship with that person and saying,
right.
hey, you know, I know you feel unsafe, but guess what? They have a new ventilation system there, and, you know, they're still enforcing masks, and they've got hand sanitizers everywhere, you know, this kind of stuff, right? And
Yes.
I'll be there too, you know, kind of thing, just to make them feel better. So yeah, well, let's put our heads together and continue the
Anytime.
journey. And I'm so excited to spend this time with you today, Céline. I just was thrilled to get the opportunity, but also learned so many wonderful things. As I said, like, you know, a lot of kindred spirit here for both sides, and you are part of the Aeolian family.
Thank you. This has been so much fun, and I'm really appreciative to you and to Bryan and to Matt. Everybody on your team is seriously so wonderful and so kind, and it's always a pleasure to communicate with any of you, which is I don't get to say all the time. But
No, thank you for that. You made my day.
Oh, absolutely, and thank you for doing this, and thank you for always being so open to some of the crazy ideas that I have, and I look forward to more, for
Yes,
sure.
well, let's conspire and we'll get some more things happening.
Anytime.
All right, well, you take good care.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.